Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is the weekend review show for December 13th through the 15th, I should say. We have a few new wide release openers. We had Jumanji: The Next Level. We had Richard Jewell. We had Black Christmas also get released this weekend, all to varying degrees of success. We also had two big limited releases out, Uncut Gems and Bombshell, that are kind of vying for the awards this season. So we'll talk about those once we get through the top 10. So we'll do deeper dives in the new wide releases, walk through the rest of the top 10, talk about award stuff, and then see what's coming out over the next couple of weeks. No time machine this week. Chris was busy, so he's going to do it for a new one next weekend. So let's do this. So number one this weekend was Jumanji: Next Level. Now let's set the scene here. So the last one did $36 million opening weekend, but had an insane multiple. I mean, absolutely insane multiple, where it went on to make over $400 million. I mean, it was one of those magical runs that I just covered week in and week out. I just could not. It was that and The Greatest Showman. We just couldn't stop talking about it for like 2 or 3 months. It felt like all the way through like March of 2018. Last year. I mean, these movies just crushed for forever. And so is that going to happen here with this one? The tracking was at about $35 million. The studio is saying that, but the common wisdom was looking at more like $40 to $50 million. I think that was more my thought process, was high 30s, low 40s. And of course, the studio is going to do a conservative estimate just because they want to have the huge story on Sunday and Monday, basically saying, hey, look how much this movie overperformed. Well, in the case of Jumanji: Next Level, this thing has exploded. It did $60.1 million this weekend at the box office, just domestically. That's way outside any expectation from the studio or any box office nerd like myself. This is a huge overperformance. And you kind of have to sort of like, why is this performing so well? Why is this doing, 24 million more than the original? And it kind of does make sense if you look at it as a pure sequel play to a highly successful movie that only came out 2 years ago. I think what we were thinking about the last couple of weeks was, one, it's December. 2, there's not a ton of hype going on for it right now, but does hype really matter for a sequel like this? Because the original, opened soft, but went on to do $400 million and an unheard of multiple, so there's a huge general audience fan base for this film. They hit the timing right. They got the sequel in under 2 years, essentially. Well, 2 years exactly. So that's a good time frame. If they waited another year, 3 years is tough. 4 years is basically really tough. Anything after that, forget about it. So they get the timing right. They got the weekend right. They kind of owned this weekend. The only other two openers were Richard Jewell and Black Christmas, was both massively bombed. We'll go into a little bit more. But Sony just really hit a grand slam with this. Now, is the multiple going to be the same as the original? Absolutely not. I think, it does have the holiday season. The next 15 days are, I think, the biggest 15 days in the box office every year. It's the 2 best weeks for the box office. So it's going to have an opportunity to make a ton of money over the next 2 weeks. Does that continue on to January? Does that continue on into February? We can kind of get a guess based on what the audiences are saying and what the critics are saying. So critics are saying 66% fresh from all critics for Jumanji: The Next Level. Top critics were a little bit lower at 55%. 60 actual score and 54 actual score from top critics. So okay marks there, not fantastic. The critics aren't loving this movie, but they didn't really love the last one either. And so this is definitely a middle of the road, middle brow, mass appeal film. That's what it is. It's here to make money. And so the critics, their viewpoints are a little bit less important than, say, like Richard Jewell or like Uncut Gems. Totally different story in those. Or even something like Black Christmas. We'll get into that. Verified audience score, 87% from that verified audience, 87 actual score. Very good. Audiences really like it. All audiences very similar. 85% fresh score, 85 actual score. Cinema score of an A-. So all this is aligning. Critics are kind of muted on it. Audiences really enjoy it. Now they're not, super ecstatic about it, but they do really like it a lot. And that's the key to making money, right? So cinema score of an A-, post track of a 70% though. Kids gave it an 80%. I think it was kids under 12. Parents and kids under 12 get an 80%. General audiences gave it a 17%. That's a little bit lower than you would want. And sort of talking about like what sort of movie Jumanji is and why it does so well. If you look at the Letterboxd score, I think it makes a lot more sense. So Letterboxd scores at a 64 out of 100. That's the exact same as Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, 64 out of 100, which doesn't sound very high. But remember, Letterboxd is very skewed towards the 60-70 range. It's very hard to get into 70s, almost impossible to get into the 80s unless it's like a masterpiece. So that's not a terrible score, but it's also not a great score. You know, compared to other stuff that came out this year, Spider-Man, in terms of adventure films, kind of similar comps. Spider-Man Far From Home got a 74 out of 100 on Letterboxd, so definitely higher. Captain Marvel, 66 out of 100. I mean, both those films did fantastically well box office wise. So what you have here is a movie that, like The Greatest Showman, like the first Jumanji, it's not a critical smash, and it's not a huge sort of win with the film nerd, film Twitter vanguard art house people, right? People are super into films, they're not that keen on it. It's okay. That same group of people does cross over into critics. Those are the people who end up becoming critics. But the general audiences do like it a lot. So I think, where is that going to sort of put this film? I think it's going to have strong legs. Nowhere near the original, not even close. But I'm thinking probably, Basement legs for this are 3x. So it's at 60 now. Basement's 180. There's no way in hell it makes under 180. I'd say like 4x is probably where this thing's going to cap out. So you're at 240. Let's see what the numbers has this really cool thing where they like sort of plot out where this thing's going to go. I think I would guess probably about the low to mid 200s. 4x is possible, I guess it is possible just because of the holidays. I don't want to say that because it's a sequel and all that sort of stuff. I don't want to throw that out, but I just don't think that it's going to push that, just because I see a little bit of weakness in that post-track number, and the fact that critics and the film nerds aren't super into it kind of doesn't bode all that well for it. But I don't know how much that matters. So I want to say probably 220 right now domestically, and on up. It all really depends on whether people come out to see it. Star Wars, it's the last Star Wars in this trilogy. It could really cut this thing off of the knees too. So I think probably 180 to 230 would be my guess domestically. Did break some records though. What did Deadline have to say here? The biggest domestic opening for Sony in the month of December, an all-time record opening for a comedy in the month of December, as well as the biggest live action opening weekend for Kevin Hart and Jack Black. And the biggest opening weekend of all time for director Jack Kasdan, whatever. Males showed up 52 to 48, kind of a typical movie-going audience, maybe a little bit over next on the female audience. Under 25 was 49%. Over 25 was 51%. So definitely normal audiences like 66, 34, skewing towards over 25. So definitely did well with the younger audiences, which is important. 49% Caucasian, 21% Asian other. So Aquafina's in this. I think that was a huge, because a normal number for Asian other group is like 10%. So they definitely doubled their normal take. African American was kind of normal at 15%, normally around 12%. So I think Kevin Hart being involved helps with that audience. And the Latino audience is actually down from a normal movie going audience at like 15% versus like a 23% normal audience. A great performance overall. I expect it. We're going to talk about this one a lot, so I don't want to just drone on about it, but like it is a great performance. Very surprising run here opening weekend. It's December. You usually don't see stuff like this where it does $25 million over tracking. But the reverse happened with Richard Jewell and Black Christmas, so maybe they just swapped numbers essentially. Okay, so that's Jumanji Next Level. We'll keep an eye on that one over the next few weeks. I expect it to easily get to that $200 million mark domestically, and who knows what it's going to do globally. We'll keep our eyes on that as well. Okay, so that's number one this week, and number two is Frozen 2, of course, from Walt Disney, $19.1 million, 45% drop, very good. Sitting at 366 right now domestically. In terms of that run, very good. I think, this thing I think it just crossed the $1 billion mark. Yeah, it did. It just crossed the $1 billion mark, I believe, this weekend worldwide. The sixth Disney film to do that this year. They just own it. It's the 11th biggest animated film of all time. It's a win. Everybody knew this was going to be a huge win. It's not exactly an exciting win, It's one of those movies where it's like it's the sixth best movie in 2019 right now. And I think that like it's kind of an expected thing, and so it doesn't feel that exciting. But it's, Disney prints money with a movie like this. And are we going to see a third Frozen? Of course we are. It just crossed $1 billion within a month. So we're coming back with more. It is interesting that where Disney is going to go with all this stuff, because we just had all the Toy Story 4, the Lion King, and all the other stuff that they were put out this year. When are we going to see a Frozen 3? Because it took 6 years to get this sequel off the ground from one of the most successful animated movies of all time. And one of those movies that was just kind of like zeitgeisty, like you could not exist in 2013, 2014 and not hear about Frozen constantly. And I was like a guy with no kids, didn't know anybody who had kids in New York, and I kept hearing about it. So it was like kind of ridiculous. So, just a great win for Disney. I think if they're smart, they could do the Disney Plus route and get this out on streaming, like a third one. Well, there's two questions with the streaming. Like, when is this going to debut on Disney Plus? And like, I'm not gonna go down that route, but there's like a whole revenue sort of business model implications of Disney Plus now existing, because normally this wouldn't go on a streaming platform for like 8-9 months. Like it wouldn't go on an SVOD, subscription video on demand model, like a Netflix essentially, for like 8 months. You could rent it and buy it in 3 months. I don't know how they're going to do that now with Disney Plus. Are they just going to push it to Disney Plus after like 6 months and say, screw the rest of the, they're not going to put on anything else. So, we'll see how this thing makes money downstream, because all those models are changing as streaming begins to really take over the industry and take over distribution basically over the next 4 to 5 years, or has been for the last decade. Okay, so that's a great performance for Frozen 2 in its fourth weekend. What else coming out? Okay, so number 3 was Knives Out, 9.2 million. Great drop, 35% drop. This is what we're talking about, legs. It's the leg season. $78 million so far, almost $79 million for Knives Out. Lionsgate's got to be so happy with this performance. They had the cast, they had a director, they had the vibe to the movie, and it's just doing so well right now. Let's take a look at global. I don't even know if it has a big global. It might have a big global audience just because, guess whodunits and mysteries can play pretty well. It's on 63 million worldwide, so basically 142 total take worldwide box office. It's a great performance for Lionsgate. It's their 20th best movie so far right now. So Lionsgate's been around for a long time, so it's a good win for them. And they needed it too. They tend to like make all of this really schlocky stuff that never does all that well, and every once in a while they have a breakout. This is definitely one of the better breakouts they've ever had. So, and also kind of a rebound for Rian Johnson. I hate saying that, just because of the Last Jedi controversy. I just felt like he got like unduly dinged for that. All that was going on, like the back and forth, the alt-right stuff, and then the weird like anti-women stuff. It was just so bizarre. It was like being stuck in the 2016 election on like repeat. And he kind of got dragged into all that, and that's great because he's a great director. He always has been, and it's great to see him sort of get out of that kerfuffle, if you will. And have a new path here and a good film to sort of put on his belt and say, hey, look, that's behind me now. I got Knives Out. I got other things that I want to do. Let's move forward. Okay, so Knives Out number 3. Number 4, Richard Jewell from Clint Eastwood. Now, if you're a younger person, if you are under the age of probably 30, the name Richard Jewell probably doesn't mean anything to you, and that's okay. So the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, it was a big deal for Atlanta, really sort of established that city as like a world city. And it was a huge deal having it in the United States. There was a bombing, and then this guy, Richard Jewell, was a security guard there. He ended up finding a bomb. I can't even remember the specifics. He ended up finding one of the bombs or another bomb or something like that, and ended up like saving people. And he became like this national hero. And then the FBI started to look at him. And then someone at the FBI leaked information to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They'll come back in a bit. And basically made it look like he was a suspect, and the media just like ran on that, like the national media. And it was almost like the OJ trial. It was like this huge deal, and everybody vilified Richard Jewell. It turns out the guy was totally innocent. The bomber was actually anti-abortionist Eric Rudolph, who was living out in the woods, kind of like the Unabomber, but this guy was just strictly anti-abortion stuff, and he had planted the bomb at the Atlanta Olympics. And so this guy was Richard Jewell, essentially railroaded and vilified in a witch hunt. And it was kind of the story of like cable news and like how the media can get out of control and how like people can want a scapegoat, and Richard Jewell was the scapegoat for that tragedy that happened at the Olympics. And so it's really a story rife for a drama, a really good drama. And unfortunately, Clint Eastwood, I'm not the biggest fan of his films. I think the quality goes up and down. I love Gran Torino. Sully is a bizarre film that I've watched way too many times, almost out of like a morbid curiosity of like, how can you make a movie like this? The movie makes zero sense. The timeline is just bonkers. And it blew my mind that like this was the product of the major Warner Brothers studios, I guess, just giving Clint Eastwood, he's quick, he's fast at shooting, he's very efficient. It's just one of those films that I watch just because it's just one of the most strange things I've ever seen as a wide release in terms of like how the narrative is constructed, how everything's shot, the vibe of it. It's just bizarre. And it doesn't always work. The train movie that he did, what is it called? 13 Minutes or something? I don't know, whatever. That was horrific and terrible. That came out earlier this year. So, Clint Eastwood's constantly working. He's constantly putting out movies. This one seems like a huge winner. The critics love this thing. Richard Jewell, 73% critics score. Okay, so they don't love it. They're kind of like, that's pretty good. 67 actual score. Top critics, same exact score. For the most part. Verified audience score on Richard Jewell, 97% with a 93 actual score. All audience, 94% with a 90 actual score. Cinema score of an A. Audiences absolutely love this. The problem is nobody is showing up to see this movie. Richard Jewell this weekend did $5 million. Tracking was putting in about 10. $2K per theater average. Awful. I think it's the worst Clint Eastwood opening ever, at least wide release wise. There was one back in the 80s, but when you adjust for inflation, this is not even close. I mean, this is pretty much a disastrous opening for this movie. And the thing that I sort of point out, like Deadline does this whole write-up about like, it's not like a joyful movie, but it's Christmas, man. This is awards movie season. Like you either get your Jumanjis or you get your Uncut Gems. You get Frozen 2 or you get Bombshell. Like it's not about like, there's two direct paths here to success in the holiday season. You're either a crowd pleaser or you're an art house film trying to get awards. I mean, that's what this season's all about. Richard Jewell is an art house movie. So the fact that it's kind of a joy kill or a buzzkill, whatever, doesn't really seem to be an excuse as wise to doing support. I mean, the Mule he put out last year opened at what? I want to say like 13, 16 or something like that. And ended up at $100 million domestically. Had that great multiple because of the holiday season. Is Richard Jewell going to have that multiple because of the holiday season? A lot of the read now is that like it's open too low. It's just open too low. Theaters aren't going to keep it in. Star Wars hits next week. It's just going to lose. The problem, it's going to lose the opportunity to have good legs because theater owners are going to get rid of it, which I think is a valid point. I think the problem here with this movie, it looks really good. I mean, it looks fantastic. You got a great cast. It's $45 million production budget, so it's not a massive budget whatsoever, but it is kind of high for an adult drama. You look at sort of the Letterboxd score right now is at a 68. Well, it's the same as Sully. The Mule's at a 64. I kind of compared it to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood just because it's like, really big adult dramas. That was at a 78 this year for Letterboxd. Of course, film Twitter loves that. So they love anything Tarantino puts out. So do I. So I'm the same world as those folks. Okay, so Richard Jewell is not doing well because they marketed it so poorly. There's tons of controversy about sort of the reporter in the movie. She traded tips for sex. Did that actually happen? Kathy shrugs. Olivia Wilde plays her in the movie. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Like they're going back and forth with Atlanta. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution is the one that sort of put the finger on Richard Jewell in the first place. So they're very guilty in all this in real life for sort of ruining this guy's life. So I think Warner Brothers was very prickly on the response to this sort of controversy, and I think they have a right to be, because basically they're making a movie that's clearing Richard Jewell's name, and it looks like a really good movie, and like some newspapers pissed off because they're defaming a reporter who's dead now. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. I don't think that they say any press is good press, In this case, it just didn't even help. I think the problem here with Richard Jewell and why it's not doing well and why it didn't open at $10 million or $15 million, it doesn't have an A-list star, it is one issue, and Deadline brings that up. I think that's a valid-ish point. You know, if Clint Eastwood was in this, or kind of a bigger name star, it would, I think, opened higher. But Paul Walter Hauser, who plays Richard Jewell, is perfect for this role. He's an amazing actor. I just listened to his WTF podcast episode. It's wonderful. I mean, it's just like one of the better episodes I've ever heard. And he really sets Mark kind of back a bit and kind of off his feet, knocks him off his feet, because he's just so different than the normal celebrities you get in there for that show. And so you had a great cast, you had a great story. You have, I would say this, I wouldn't say he's a masterful director, but I would say you have a very proficient, professional director who is a craftsman. That's what Clint Eastwood is now. Like, he makes well-made films. Sully is a whole sort of different conversation, but he comes in and he gets it done. This thing was shot over the summer. It was shot over the summer, edited and put together in time for December 13th release. I mean, the guy's insane. He's like, well, like 80 something years old, 85, he's whatever. So there was a lot going for this film overall. I think the issue here is that you didn't have that A-lister, right? Or like, you're not even really B-lister. He's more like a C-lister. He had a big role in I, Tonya, and that was kind of, he was also in, what was that movie I just watched? A Late Night. He was in that as well. But he's always had side roles. This is his first sort of leading role in a major film. And a lot of people don't really know him all that well. So that was one issue. I think the bigger issue, and people have also been bringing up, like, there's the political angle to this. What's the political angle to Richard Jewell? Like, I don't get why every single movie now has to become some civil war about American politics. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, this is a pretty straightforward tragedy story. And that, like, you know, it's a commentary on a lot of different things. And look, Clint Eastwood does not align with me politically at all. I'm in a completely different spectrum than he is. But at the same time, you know, you watch something like American Sniper, it's like, yeah, kind of rah, a little bit fascist, but like, you get where he's coming from. You get the story he's trying to tell, and he did it pretty well there. With his other movies, it's kind of similar. Gran Torino is another good example where, you know, I like his effort in delving into those issues about immigration, about violence, about guns, about how we treat each other, about, you know, our moral integrity and stuff like that. I like that he engages those issues, because most directors don't even touch them with a 10-foot pole because they're afraid to. And I'm sure that there's a lot in here about the media and how the mass media can sort of get into a feeding frenzy, and what are their motivations? Is it just about clicks? Is it just about readers? Do they care about what they're doing? I'm sure that's a huge part of this movie, and from what I've heard from critics, it is. You know, that it seems like an engaging movie. The problem here, I think, is that you know, there's all these red herrings is the problem. Oh, it's not an A-lister. Oh, it's too political. Oh, there's this controversy with the newspaper that smeared Richard Jewell and basically ruined his life, blah, blah, blah. Those are red herrings to me. The problem here was marketing. I saw one trailer for this maybe 3 weeks ago. I had no idea it existed 4 weeks ago. Now, I follow movies and stuff like that. I'm not like a super expert. It's not my job, but I do watch trailers constantly. I do look at release schedules. I heard that there's a Richard Jewell movie coming out. Didn't see a trailer until like 3-4 weeks ago. I think a lot of it had to do with the quick turnaround time and shoot in the summer, edit everything, get it out by Christmas. I think what happened, and Deadline does hint at this a little bit, but I don't think they really hit the nail on the head, is that this is a marketing rollout failure. You have Warner Brothers, you have a big budget here. This should have, why would you rush it out in Christmas? Why wouldn't you put it out at Sundance and do like a March release or an April release and really sort of own the weekend or own that story? Everything right now is just so crowded with Star Wars, with Frozen, with all these other movies coming out. The Richard Jewell just got lost, and they weren't willing to spend the amount of marketing dollars for people to find it. And to me, that's the number one problem here. You have a great product from a great group of actors, a good director, an interesting story, You should be able to open this thing to $10 million. It's, you have Warner Brothers backing you on distribution. So this thing should have opened to 15, should closed out well over 50, maybe even higher. That's not going to happen. It's a failure because they didn't market it appropriately, and now it's going to die kind of a really quickly death in a very competitive December box office. Okay, so that's that on Richard Jewell. Let's keep going here. Black Christmas, another failure. $4.4 million. This one was tracking at 10 million. So let's talk a little about Black Christmas. If you guys aren't horror movie fans or aficionados, I should say, you probably don't know that much about it. Black Christmas was a Canadian horror film that came out in 1974. It was considered one of the first slashers. It's pre-Halloween, but there's slashers before that. Psycho, of course, is probably the first slasher ever, or something like that. So whatever. It's Black Christmas 1974 is a cult hit among horror movie fans. I've seen it a few times. I think it's fantastic. It's so much of a cult hit that Joe Bob Briggs, if you don't know him, he's sort of a horror host who's made a huge resurgence on Shudder, the streaming horror service, essentially. He did a marathon on Friday night. Started out, it was the Joe Bob's Red Christmas or something like that, Christmas themed horror. Of course, he started out with Black Christmas. Rewatched it with his commentary. It's phenomenal. If you're a horror movie fan, please watch that. He doesn't love the movie as much as like the horror community does. I thought I had seen it a long time ago. The original is fantastic. I mean, it is really just this slice of horror filmmaking from the 70s, completely independent, made up in Canada and Toronto. Just felt there's just like a vibe to it where like, this is like fun. Like, this is like, they're having a good time. This is not market research. This is just a group of people coming together, trying to make the best movie they can. And it is fascinating. It's not a masterpiece at all, but I think if you're a horror movie fan, there's a lot to love about it. And that's why the Letterboxd score for Black Christmas 1974, the original, was at a 76. Which is approaching sort of masterpiece level on Letterboxd. There was the remake in 2006. I did see it opening weekend. I hated it. That had a 48 Letterboxd score. So that is not well liked. This one here, Black Christmas 2019. This one's from Blumhouse Universal. So the deal there is Blumhouse says, hey, here's $5 million to make this movie. Universal has a distribution model with them, so that these $5 million movies don't just sink at the box office because Blumhouse is not going to spend $40 million to market them. So Universal sort of picks that side of things up for them. They did that with us. A lot of Get Out, I think, was the same thing. So it's a really good model for them. It ends up working really well. Here, they had everything lined up. I just don't think the movie's very good. Rotten Tomatoes, critics give it a 66, 60 actual score, 55%, 54 actual score. Verified audiences. What is the verified audiences for this? Oh wait, sorry. I'm reading the entire wrong numbers. Oh my god. Okay, so yeah, I thought it was much worse than that. So, rewind. Black Christmas 2019. All critics score 43% on Rotten Tomatoes, 45 actual score. Top critics 62%. But that's a really small group of people at 40, but still only a 48 out of 100. All audience score here, the verified audience score, 29%. Now, maybe the lowest one I've ever seen in my life. Not a ton of ratings, though, because a lot of people didn't see it. 29%, basically like what, a 46, 47 actual score. All audiences lower, 23% from all audiences with a lot more ratings. Below 40 actual score. See, these are some of the worst scores I have ever seen for a movie. This thing sucks. D+ cinema score, awful. Post track of a 30%. I've never seen anything like that before. A 30% actual score. This thing is a disaster. And so, why did this happen? Briefly, the Black Christmas. So we talked a little bit about the original. So the original is a cult hit. Because it's just kind of like it's really crude, it's really gross, but it's fun in that way. And the sequel has none of the sort of vibe of the original whatsoever, so it sucked. It was just kind of like a rip-off, boring remake. This one takes it in a lot different direction from what I hear. Now, I've seen the trailer and I've seen a lot of the critical sort of feedback on the film. There's a strong sort of women fight back sort of thing going on here, and apparently there's a ton of social commentary happening, which it's a horror film, folks. Like, this is what horrors have, there's different tenets of horror films, right? There's different sort of elements of horror films, I should say. You have the gore aspect. Okay, that's great. That's fun. There's the scary aspect of it, or feeling fear, or as Wes Craven would say, releasing your fear. When you go to see a horror movie, you release it. You don't get it created. You let it out in the movie theater. And that's why people enjoy it so much. And then I think there's always been a very strong element of social criticism. And a lot of them horror films are almost satire. If you think going back to like The Modest Proposal, where, it's a satire of how they're treating the Irish. I mean, there's the ability of horror to put up a mirror to society and say, hey, this is what we actually look like. This is what we're actually doing. And it's grotesque and it's scary. And so social commentary, has always been an integral part of the horror movie genre. Here, it sort of stepped on a landmine. We're in a really strange political space in America. It's very, people use the word tribal, but it's basically we're in a cultural civil war right now, where there's two different versions of America, two different visions for the future. And we're basically fighting with each other to see who's going to win and sort of take over the country and move it forward in the direction they want it to go to. I think with this Black Christmas version here, what happened was it was trying to be very topical, trying to be very have a feminist message, and it just didn't land. And it didn't land not only with the people. I think the problem is that it didn't land with the general audiences because they saw that part of it like, I don't want to see it, which is like, whatever. Like, if you don't want to see stuff like that, fine, go live in a cave. But I think the real problem here is the people who did see it and wanted to see it didn't like it. So the people that knew that was going to be a part of the movie went to go see it like, no, this is not good. So it's just one of those situations where they swung for the fences on some version in some way and lost and just didn't really connect. And that's okay because it's a small bet. It's a $5 million production budget. Blumhouse doesn't care. Blumhouse is probably just happy they got some cool publicity from this movie. And so Universal's kind of be like, whatever, you win some, you lose some. For every, us, we have 5 Black Christmases. So I think it's fine financially. I think it is interesting that from what I couldn't understand about this is someone who follows horror movies and is really into the genre. The original is just it's a classic. The remake, I get doing that because, Black Christmas wasn't really considered a cult classic probably until the 2000s. It was kind of forgotten for a long time. And then in the 2000s, as sort of DVDs came out and people started to go into back catalogs. That's when it became sort of famous again among film nerds and horror nerds. That's when I came to it, probably in 2004, 2005, before the remake. So the remake happens. It's not very good. It sucks. Has nothing to do with the original really in terms of vibe or tone. Why in the hell are you making another remake 13 years later? It doesn't make any sense to me. When they announced this, I was like, there's a lot other horror films to remake that haven't, nobody's touched. Why are you doing another Black Christmas? It just doesn't make any freaking sense to me whatsoever. So that's that. A terrible performance for this movie. It's going nowhere and people are forget about it. I, of course, am going to see it as soon as possible. Okay, so that is number 5. Number 6 is Ford versus Ferrari, cruising along here, 38% drop. Look at those legs. $100 million so far. I was guessing 150. I think I'm going to be right because this thing it's still in almost 3,000 theaters. It did lose 900 theaters essentially this weekend. So it is starting to lose a little bit of its gas here, but I think it's going to play strong for the next 2 weeks. I'm saying 150 on that. Great performance from that movie. Look for the best picture nom on that one. I almost guarantee it's going to happen in January. Queen and Slim from Universal, 46% drop this weekend, 3.6 million. Starting to lose a little bit of theaters, not a ton. It's done $33 million. That to me is just that is one of the more surprising things that I've seen, that movie is doing that well, just because it just felt so edgy. But I think that edginess got people to show up for it, and they tend to really like that. It gets the word of mouth going. I think it's a good film as well. So number 8 was A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, 3.3 million, 35% drop, only $49 million. This one's still a mystery to me. I know I've talked about it a lot, probably on and on, but I don't get the releasing strategy. I don't get what they were trying to do. You have Tom Hanks playing Mr. Rogers. This should be $100 million movie. Easily, everybody should be seeing it. I don't know why that's not happening. Something must have happened with test screenings or with critical takes. Everything looks good in the numbers, but something just seems off as to why it's not performing all that well. and why it didn't, hasn't done better. I think a later release date, maybe like right around Christmas, would have been better for A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Number 9, Dark Waters. This one at $2 million. This is the Mark Ruffalo sort of anti-DuPont film that sits at 8.8, almost $9 million domestically. Didn't really seem like it had a place in the multiplex. This would have been a streaming film on Netflix or HBO, but would anybody see it then? It's kind of a weird thing. Like it's tough. The way these movies get released now it's brutal. There's just not a clear path for a movie like Dark Waters anymore, like there was 20 years ago. 21 Bridges, still in the top 10 here, 60% drop. Lost 900 theaters, sits at 26 million. That's an underperformance for me. I just felt like that had a great trailer, great marketing, great premise. Looked, great star in it. I just felt like this thing could have been easily $50 million domestically. It's just crossing the halfway mark now. It's not going to get there. Okay, let's talk about outside the top 10. What is going on? Okay, so we had two very big, very big limited releases, which is sort of oxymoron. So number one was Uncut Gems. So 5 different cities. The buzz on this is just insane. Background on Uncut Gems. Safdie brothers, I think that's how you pronounce their name, whatever. They made Good Time, which is one of my favorite films of the decade. It's just brilliant. So from out of left field, a filmmaking style that is just so New York and so 1970s that you see it and you're like, how did this come out this year? This is unbelievable. Like I was blown away by that movie. So I'm super excited about it. A lot of people in the film Twitter, film nerd world are very excited about Uncut Gems. Adam Sandler, of course, plays the lead in a role, that he's never really played before. Just sort of off the wall, crazy, kinetic movie. I hear it's wonderful, but you kind of have to be up for it. You kind of have to buckle up and be like, I want to do this. It made over $100K per theater this weekend in that limited platform release. 105K, I believe, to be exact. What does that mean? So when we're talking limited releases, let's do a brief review of that. Normally platform release, New York, Los Angeles, 4 to 5 theaters ish. I can name the theaters. It's ArcLight in Los Angeles. It's the Angelica or IFC in New York. It's sort of the same theaters that do this. And so what you're looking for in a limited platform release is the pop off. So anything below 30 is not going to pop off. That's 30K per theater opening weekend on the platform. Not going to happen. Anything above 30 is something to notice, something to sort of raise your eyebrows at. Oh, that's interesting. That's a good performance. Anything above the 50 to 60 range is definitely set up in your seat. Something is happening. Anything above the 50 range, 50K per theater on a platform is basically saying this thing is popping off in New York and Los Angeles. What does that mean? It can mean a lot of different things. And the example I always go to is this. You can have a movie open at over 100K per theater, which is insane, massive, top of the year in this platform release, and it fails wide release. Just does not play outside the New York and Los Angeles crowd. Uncut Gems is going to be that. There is no way in hell Uncut Gems does well in Omaha, San Antonio, Dallas, Madison, Wisconsin, or maybe Madison, Green Bay, Wisconsin, Aurora, Illinois. It's just not going to happen. The filmmaking style is too artistic. It's too, that's not the right term. It's too experimental. It's too out there. It's too outside the norm. It's not a Clint Eastwood movie, right? These things are insane. And I hear that it's actually just a hell of a ride. Maybe Adam Sandler helps with that. But 105K per theater average, if you translate that out, should easily make $30-40 million domestically worldwide domestically when it does wide release. That's not going to happen on Uncut Gems. I can guarantee you right now that it's not going to do that. It's going to have an okay wide release, but it's not going to break out hardly at all. It's going to be another Steve Jobs situation, which made like well over $100 million, well over 100K per theater and just crashed and burned on wide release. In my gut, that's what I think is going to happen. I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong. Movies like Pulp Fiction, which weren't supposed to be wide released, and do all that well. Maybe it's one of those. Maybe it does play well wide, but 99.9%, my gut says there's no way Uncut Gems plays well outside of the big cities. On the reverse side of that is Bombshell, which also platformed release. This is the the picture about Fox News and the sexual harassment that's going on. Charlize Theron, Nicole Kidman, Margot Robbie. You have this amazing cast. The trailer's phenomenal. So that platform this weekend in 4 theaters, New York, Los Angeles, $78K per theater. Massive, huge. Even though it's below Uncut Gems, I guarantee you Bombshell is going to have a much bigger, wide release. And it's also because it's A24 is doing Uncut Gems, Bombshell's Lionsgate. So I think that Bombshell's, going to break out very big. What does that mean? I don't know, $40-50 million domestically, easy. Uncut Gems, I think it's lucky to get like 19-20. Lucky, maybe like more like 14-15. So that's just the name of the game with this stuff. Like the fact that it is doing well in New York, Los Angeles, Uncut Gems, that helps a lot with the award stuff. But like, I don't know. The Golden Globes came out, didn't they? I don't think it got awarded or nominated for much of anything. So maybe this performance is going to help that movie. Bombshell, I think, is going to have a lot of award stuff thrown in it, just because of the story and the cast involved. Okay. Also coming out, one of my favorite filmmakers, Terrence Malick. If you don't know him, he was big in the 70s, Badlands, Days of Heaven. He came back in the 90s from just complete obscurity to do Thin Red Line, which is my favorite war film of all time, one of my favorite films of all time. I did The New World, which is also, to me, another masterpiece. And then he kind of disappeared again. Well, actually, did he disappear? He just kept on making movies. Oh, Tree of Life, of course. So Tree of Life is probably his most well-known movie. And he was the movie he made when like the internet was mature enough where like all the nerds could come together and just sort of like rant and rave and hype about it. So Tree of Life is like one of those movies that like a lot of people have seen. I hate that movie. As a Terrence Malick like lover, I absolutely despise that movie. I think it's terrible. I think it's the worst parts of his filmmaking put on screen there. It does not have the narrative richness or emotional sort of insight and wisdom, I think, of his earlier films at all. But from then on, he's been super active and making a lot of films, which is so weird nearing the end of his life that he's making all his movies when, in his 30s and 40s, 50s, he wasn't doing much besides, I guess, studying Heidegger or whatever. So Hidden Life is his new one. It looks so good. It reminds me a lot of a little bit of Badlands, a lot of Days of Heaven. Really has that sort of, farmer sort of situation, countryside, beautiful pastoral. And in this one, it involves World War II and a man supposed to, as an Austrian citizen, I think supposed to pledge allegiance to Hitler and refuses to do this. So we have some political stuff going on here. It just seems like a grand slam for award stuff. This thing is failing on platform release. 5 theaters, it's only doing $10K per theater. Where are my film nerds at? Where's Film Twitter at on this movie? They need to stop bickering about Marriage Story and freaking Irishmen on Twitter and get out and go see this Terrence Malick movie. This is ridiculous. I know it's never going to be a wide release hit, but like, come on. The film snobs better be seeing this thing, and they're not. Okay, so 10K per theater is disaster for this. I mean, that's awful. Fox Searchlight, is a pretty fairly big studio for art house stuff, is not going to be happy with that opening. It's a very long film. But there was so much buzz on this too. Like, I just don't get why. That's sad, man. That's sad. I think Uncut Gems and Bombshell really took that audience. It's probably at the same theaters too. It's probably the Angelica, all 3 with the Angelica. People are going to go to see Bombshell and Uncut before they're going to see Hidden Life. I mean, they just are. There's more hype to them. So that's probably what's happening. I hope it does better, and I really want to see it soon because I love Terrence Malick and it looks beautiful. But awards nominations for that are not going to be coming if it only does that little of a money. Okay, no Time Machine today. Chris will be back next week. So let's close out the show here and talk about what's coming out over the next few weeks at the box office. Okay, so this weekend, we have Cats, Star Wars, Bombshell expands wide. That's kind of cool. They're expanding it wide right away. I would have waited 2 weeks, but like whatever. You want that buzz to be super hyped. Okay, so Cats, what is Cats gonna do? Let's go to Box Office Pro really quick because I want to get my head straight on like what we're guessing here and what this thing's gonna do. I think the common wisdom with Cats was that it's going to be like $20-ish million, something like that. They're saying $12 million. That makes no sense. Box Office Pro is saying $12 million. They're saying 10 to 20 opening weekend. Domestic range 50 to 100. That's a huge range. They're saying $59 million domestically. That doesn't seem that far off. Yeah, it's going to be depressed because it's December. I mean, Greatest Showman, I think, opened at like 12 or something like that. So certainly possible that it does that. Maybe they're a lot smarter than I am. I just feel like the memeage and sort of bad press hype on this was so much that people are just going to be so curious just to go see this thing. And it's tough because it's Star Wars. I guess maybe 12 does make sense. I don't know. I think it does like 20, 25. And I think it goes on to make like over $100 million because like once you get over the weirdness of the look, you got the songs. People love musicals. It's winter outside. For some reason, people want to go inside and see musical films unless it's Mary Poppins remake. So I think it's going to do well. I think it's going to do over 100 and open at like 2025 this weekend, even though Star Wars is coming out. Star Wars, Rise of the Skywalker, Last of the Trilogy. What's this thing going to do? I don't know. They're saying $200 million here on Box Office Pro. They're saying 185 to 225. I think that's fair. Domestic. I love their domestic total ranges $550 million to $750 million, a $200 million range. They're saying 680 as a total. I have no idea. Is this a Rogue One opening where it does 180 something? It's not going to be Solo, obviously. Is it going to be over $200 million? I could totally see it doing over $200 million, but like, it's not going to happen. You know, my guess is right now, and last week I don't even know what I guessed, probably something totally different, but I feel like 210, 212, but then you have Avengers Endgame, which changed everything. And so now it's sort of like, you know, it's 250 doable. I don't know. Like, that's why I'm leaning towards, because Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame have changed the box office, right? Completely. Are movies are going to be that big? Yes, there's going to be movies that big in the future. Of course there are. That's just the way how business works. So I just get the feeling we're gonna bump up against this high range of 225. I think it's going to do like 230, 240. Why the hell not? It's the last movie in the trilogy. People that's like bad taste in their mouth from Last Jedi. That's bullshit. That's just like stupid propaganda that people are spreading around. The people who saw the movie objectively loved it. If you look at the scores, Last Jedi before, you know, all these like Twitter trolls poison the well, it's like a 90% something, cinema score and all that kind of stuff. So I don't buy the poison in the well in this one and bad taste in people's mouth. I'm gonna say 230, 240. Then on Christmas, Little Women, Spies in Disguise, Uncut Gems goes wide, and that kind of closes out the year. Little Women's gonna be fantastic. Everyone's gonna see it. I'm gonna go see it with my parents. It's gonna be awesome. It's a perfect holiday movie to see. They're saying 23 million opening weekend, which is Christmas, which is a Wednesday. Closes out 115. That seems about right to me. Spies in Disguise are saying 16. Closes out 75. They have Uncut Gems opening at $5 million. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I don't see it. I don't see it playing in Omaha. Will it play in Peoria? I don't think so. And then we're into 2020. It's going to be exciting. 2020, you got like all this stuff coming out right away. You have 1917 opens up on the 10th. That's perfect for the awards sort of run. The Grudge remake, another remake of The Grudge, opens on 22. John Chu's in it, though. He's fantastic. If you guys haven't seen Columbus, go see it. The Grudge, yeah, so that's on the first part of January. And then we have, I love the January drops of like the genre drops that come out, like Underwater with TJ Miller and Kristen Stewart. I mean, who thought that was being a good idea to put that movie out? It looks horrific. New Bad Boys movie comes out on the 17th. There's a lot coming out in January. January is probably like one of my favorite months of film, of the box office, just because of the type of movies that come out. August is a little bit similar because it's not rote, it's not by formula. It's just like whatever we have left in the back in terms of movies we need to release at some point. Let's just dump them in January and August and see what happens. It's a fun time. Okay, so that's it, folks. I will be back next weekend. It's gonna be super busy for me, so I'm definitely gonna try and do a show on the weekend, but like I can't promise it. It is Star Wars. So I might do like a Saturday show or a Friday show to kind of talk about how it's doing and how it's going to do over the weekend. We'll have the first numbers by then. I may not be able to do a Sunday recap show just because of the holidays. In any event, folks, thanks for listening. This has been the Wildline Podcast.